Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Vegas Legal Magazine podcast. I'm Mark Fierro here with the publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine, Tyler Morgan, and Vice President of Fierro Communications, Jeff Haney. Today, we're going to be talking about a story of asymmetrical warfare, a story of David and Goliath. And for anyone out there who follow politics, you probably know that Representative Dina Titus is one of the safest seats in the region. Last time she went out on election, she put a 2-1 ass whooping on her opponent. That didn't stop our next guest, Reuben D'Silva, from taking on the incumbent. Last election, D'Silva took Titus on as an independent, and he got hit by the Dina Titus train. But D'Silva's an interesting guy, not somebody we want to count out. I'm not in the business of counting out any Marines, ex-Marines. An interesting character. He's not only is he a Marine veteran, he's someone who shot it out in Fallujah, got hit in Fallujah, was given the 2 awards,
Purple
Heart, and the Navy's
Navy Achievement Medal. And
for that, as far as I'm concerned, that gets him on the show. That earns him a place in this. And thank you so much for joining us today, Reuben D'Silva.
Thank you, Mark.
So, I guess David and Goliath goes 2 ways. Malcolm Gladwell says David had to win, right? Because everybody else was standing still.
Yeah, it's
and
a great book by Malcolm Gladwell.
But
I'll say one thing. I don't know about the Dina Titus train hitting me, because I did run as an independent and ran the most successful independent campaign in the history of Nevada against Dina Titus. And
so
there was many Democrats who came out and voted for me in that race.
Which begs the question, are you a Democrat?
I'm a Democrat. I always have been a progressive, been a Democrat. I left the Democratic Party because I was not happy, as many of my generation feel with politics in general. We know that millennials, about 40% of us aren't registered to any party. And I think we had an interesting conversation here with Tyler earlier about how we're just not happy with the way things are. And I was an individual now who was actually inspired by the Bernie Sanders campaign for president. And this is, again, an independent in the United States Senate who joined the Democratic Party and sought to reform the party from the inside out. And I did run as an independent in 2016, did very well, even it blew my mind how well we were doing out there and how powerfully our message resonated with the voters here in the state. So we made the choice in 2018 to challenge Dina and to show the Democratic Party and the community at large, the state, the world, that we need options in elections. It's inconceivable to me that somebody like Dina Titus can run every year without having any sort of real opposition, without having any sort of real challenge. And it creates and festers this understanding that the system is rigged and that decisions are made behind closed doors. And it's a very few people who actually make the decisions for everybody in these elections. And I'm here to challenge that entire way of thinking. And if we win, if we can, again, take on Dina, again, no denigration to her. I think she served well. Her time is up, I believe, strongly believe. And many of the voters here in Nevada also are parroting this, are also believing this. I'm actually parroting their sentiments. We can make history, and we can change the Democratic Party, make it a better party, a stronger party, a larger party, and a more significant party moving forward into the 21st century.
So one of the big questions about these 2018 elections, the primary as well as the main event, they're being looked upon as a real crossroads election. First, the Democrats are trying to mount a resurgence, regain a lot of their power. But then second, and a little more nuanced, a little more interesting perhaps, what is that Democratic wave going to look like? In some respects, it's the old guard versus young up-and-comers who maybe could change the face of what the Democratic Party looks like. Do you see it that way? And how do you project what we're going to see for the rest of this year?
Yeah, I totally see it that way. I think this is a very consequential moment in not just the history of party politics, but in the history of this nation. We're the most divided that we've ever been. At least since the Civil War, maybe some people are saying. But we are a divided country. And moving forward, even the parties themselves are not as united as they were. You can see that Trumpism is something that's is dominant now amongst the Republicans. So they're also going through this identity crisis. What's going to be the future of the Republican Party? And we're doing the same thing here on the progressive side as Democrats. You see the old guard, folks like Nancy Pelosi, Dina Titus, Chuck Schumer, these people who have held power for a long time, who are, again, in many ways hindering the growth of the party. And it's the young progressives, it's the newer voices, not just necessarily younger people, but just newer voices, newer folks who need to participate in the system that are going to actually, I think, break that calcified environment that the Democratic Party has become, and can actually reach the full potential of the Democratic message. The message again of uplifting the working class, the poor, the marginalized peoples of this country, and incorporating them into the fabrics of the American economy and social and cultural life.
See, I think a lot of the problem that people have with their own party is that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, you're so staunch to one direction that you're unwilling to look to any other. You're unwilling to accept any other theory of thought whatsoever when it's coming into lobbying or the rulemaking process. So, do you think you can actually get into office and actually work with Republicans and independents and actually come to an agreement and work alongside them versus just constantly sitting across the table from them and just rejecting everything because we never get anything done in Congress these days. I mean, everybody's so just far-fetched against each other. Nobody actually wants to work together, and I think that's what the younger generation wants, is they want people to come in who can actually work together and actually get something done rather than it be a Democrat-Republican issue, and so black and white.
Oh yeah, very true. That's the whole point of governance. It's about working with different sorts of people. And this is, again, something that we've had in our legacy as Americans from the beginning. You look at, even the Constitutional Convention and how much of just a ruckus it was. You have all these people saying this is the way America should be, or we should have this amendment put in place, or we should have a unified Congress. No, we need a bicameral Congress. What about apportionment and representation? You have all these great debates taking place, but in the end, you compromise. You come together and you try to forge a pathway forward together as a nation, according to the general will of the citizenry. And that's the sort of philosophy that's at the bottom line of who I am, not just as a person, but definitely as an individual who's seeking to be a lawmaker. So I'm going in there fully understanding that yes, I do have my vehement beliefs, I have strong opinions on things, but in the end, we have to come together as a nation and forge a pathway forward. And I think there's a lot of hope for it.
I will tell you those are nice ideas, but this isn't something that two parties came to. The bottom line is that Newt Gingrich did away with all cooperation. It was intentional. The freshman classes would come into Congress, and it was mandatory. Both parties went to Greenbrier, and they took time. They took a week. And what happened is not only did the members learn about each other and perspective about each other, their spouses got to know each other. Their kids grew up together because a lot of them ended up living in Washington, D.C. Newt Gingrich did away with that. He wanted no Republicans talking to any Democrats. Harry Reid doesn't get credit, but he reached across the aisle over and over and over again during the Bush years. It was not easy to do business with somebody as stupid as George Bush was, as ignorant, intentionally ignorant. But he did it. Mitch McConnell said that it was his goal to make sure that Obama never got any. But when he said that, it's very important to remember that the country was spiraling, that we'd lost more than 1 million jobs in a single month. What he was saying is not that we're not going to lift a finger to help Obama, that we weren't going to lift a finger to help the United States, the people at home that were losing homes, families that were being destroyed. So the idea that you're going to come and that somebody is going to be willing to sing Kumbaya with you, that comes from the other side of the aisle. You need to know that. And the other thing is, I understand what you're saying about incumbency, but what would you truly do different?
There's some important
Than Dina.
There's some important contrast between myself and Dina. One is the fact, and again, this is one of my underlying fundamental beliefs too, when it comes to the idea of understanding politics, it's that there's too much of a role of special interests, and especially big money in politics. We've moved forward with this campaign and accepted no contributions from special interests, and especially corporate donations. This is, again, I think it's killing both parties. You look at these special interest groups, the NRA. I mean, they're having such an influence on our lawmakers, and we've made it a point to stay away from it. We've had opportunities to talk to people from PACs with considerable amounts of money that could make us even more of a potent campaign here. But again, it's my fundamental belief that we have to stay away from that, because that money's never given to you as oh, here you go run for office, have as you are, everything's going to be fine and dandy. There's always strings attached. And it's something that I think we as a Democratic Party have to really move away from. I'm supportive of even putting it in our bylaws that we don't accept any corporate donations at all. Dina's taken corporate donations from Nevada Energy, AT&T, all kinds of corporate folks now that are going to have some sort of an interest in how you make your laws and what kind of stances you take in politics. I have no qualms whatsoever to tell those people no at any given time.
A trending phenomenon that many, or at least a good number of the new breed of Democrats, if you will, are taking that position against PAC money and corporate money. And bottom line is, what do they get for that money? Access, favors? I mean, why is that so important? Why is that such a big issue?
You're talking about the financing of campaigns themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's just because you need money to run these campaigns. These are expensive campaigns.
Yeah.
You know, it takes quite a bit of fundraising. You know, I spend a lot of my time raising money. The rest of my time is all on the majority. It is the majority is getting in front of voters, knocking on doors, calling them up, participating in town halls. Which, by the way, Titus has not participated in one public town hall. All that calling for Dean Heller, you know, when he had his, little issue there with the Affordable Health Care Act, she has not got in front of the voters, and especially has done something I think which is curtailing democracy big time. She's not willing to debate me or get in a public setting with me. She has to do that if she's really about true democratic principles.
I was the district director for Congressional District 1, and I would step away from the federal payroll in order to run those campaigns for then Congressman Jim Bilbray. And as an incumbent, it's your job, particularly as a successful incumbent, it's your job to stay away from as many debates as possible. I don't think there's anything unusual about that. And I would like to make one point of disclosure. I try to disclose whenever I've got a conflict here. I have given to Dina in the past. I probably will give to her. As a matter of fact, I'm committed to giving to her this go-around. I understand what you're saying about corporate money, but the reality, and not so much the case in this particular district, but the reality is, until we do something about Citizens United, you're going to a gunfight with a lemon meringue pie. You know, not so much in this, because it is what it is. If there's some way that you can catch fire, that's to your credit, and that means the system will go that way. But in most cases, when there's a district that's up for grabs 10% one way or the other, that's purple to a large extent, it's only money that makes a difference, because you simply do not have the wherewithal to get your message out to withstand attacks. I commend you. I like the idea. So what do you do about Citizens United?
Yeah, I think the most direct way of dealing with it is through a constitutional amendment. I mean, the courts have ruled that it is the right of a corporate entity to be deemed a person and to spend money. In
Corporations are people too.
Corporations are people, and their spending of money in races is their political right to expression, which is problematic to me. I don't think that I do not agree with that at all. So to address your question directly, I think it's a multi-part comments that you made there. First, we have the beginning of everything is small. We have to get people in there who are clean, who don't have any sorts of connections or commitments to corporations or big money at all. And again, we've seen some successes in the 2016 congressional races. We saw folks win, like Ro Khanna in California, who didn't accept any corporate donations and still won. Again, very expensive races without having to take any contributions from corporate entities. And again, this is like you said, a real movement that's going to grow. It's at its beginning stages, but I think that the Democratic Party is embracing this moving forward, and it's going to be folks like me who are going to be pushing that envelope even further, who can really start bringing about that change sooner than later.
And you raised such a good point about what's going on over on the Republican side. In other words, that there's another party that's also doing a lot of soul searching right now in their own way, a lot of self-examination. Originally, we had this idea that perhaps President Trump is a renegade who kind of hijacked the party, and once he's gotten rid of, things will go back to normal. But perhaps we've instead settled into a reality where Trump is the GOP and the GOP is Trump, and it's Trump's party. Which way do you see it?
I think that the Republican Party is still going through a lot of soul searching. I think I do not agree with President Trump on almost on any issue. I think he's one of the worst things that's happened to our country. This is again my personal perspective on things, and he's really hurting the nation. at this moment. I mean, he when the country seemed to have been going on a more unified course, he comes into the mix of things and just is an atom bomb, really. And we see all these age-old divisions that we've had and differences all coming back to the fray. And he is one of the reasons why we've become such a disunited country. So I think that there's a lot of good Republicans, I believe, who are seeing this. You know, I commend people like Brian Sandoval, who took stances against Donald Trump, who publicly spoke out against some of the rhetoric that was coming out of his campaign. And there are more good Republicans, I believe, than the Trumpists, who are seeking to, again, revision America and recreate America in an image that it never existed, first and foremost. But in the same token, are trying to create something that is inherently un-American. You know, ethno-nationalism is, you know, you see the rise of this all across the country, of racial instances, of racial divisions. These are things that we worked so vehemently against over the course of the 20th century, and they've just been ripped open again. So I'm going to be doing all that I can to get Donald Trump out of the presidency, hopefully as a congressman, come to the 2020 election. But I'm looking forward to whoever the Democratic nominee is going to be. We need to have a damn good nominee there to unseat Donald Trump.
If the Democrats take the House, they're the body of investigation, and the House is the one that writes articles of impeachment. Would you vote to impeach?
Oh, if I am elected to Congress, I would love to be on the ethics committee, so I could be one of those congressmen who does vote then and there to begin the impeachment process, because I really believe that there's going to be something that's going to come from this Russia investigation. The evidence is it's there. It just has to be unraveled in a proper way, and that's, I think, going to be the actual legal precedents that we can move forward with if we're going to impeach Donald Trump.
They talk about witch hunts. It's always interesting to me why are these people willing to plead guilty and turn state's evidence over witch hunt?
It's inherently problematic. You see it as it rolls out, that there's something up there, you know. And for the president of the United States of America to be in a collusion, to be in cahoots with Putin and Russia and the Russian intelligence services, that is just, it doesn't sit well with me. I fought for this country. I bled for this country. I went to war for this country. I got a Purple Heart. By the way, I'll say before I was even a citizen, I couldn't even vote here. And to see that the commander-in-chief, if that's what you want to call him right now, laying in bed with the enemy is something I just can't stand as an American.
I think this is the part that we do know, whether it leads to Trump or not. We do know this. We do know that the Russians were involved in the Italian political campaigns. They were involved in Brexit. They were involved, did everything they could to get the tide turned against immigration. And we do know that they were involved in the election. Whether Trump himself knew it or not, I don't think we've heard from special counsel yet. But it becomes glaringly obvious that there are a lot of people around him, including funders of his campaign, that had everything to do with Russia. And the reason that I think that it's so important is Russia is our mortal enemy. I hate to say this, but 100 years from now, Russia will be our mortal enemy. Abraham Lincoln said that Russians would always be slaves because they love their dictators, just as Americans would always be free because we love our freedom. This is the enemy that we have stood off with. These are the people who made the rockets that allow North Korea to threaten us with nuclear annihilation. These are the people who created the AK-47s that shot our guys in Vietnam, some of the planes that were used, and certainly the money that kept the war alive and in Vietnam. They've been our mortal enemies in Syria, and just a few days ago, Russians were trying to kill American soldiers. So when people say, well, wouldn't it be nice if we could sit down with Russia? That's not what's at stake here. That'll never be on the table. That will never be on the
you're
table.
absolutely right about that. You know, and you of all people know this, you know being in Capitol Hill during the late 80s, early 90s.
When the wall came down.
When the wall came down, the Cold War had seemed to end. There was a moment there. And again, I have a more optimistic view on history and on diplomacy. I think that over the course of time, you know, as long as there's some sort of a back and forth, some sort of ability to negotiate and to actually have a discourse, that you can actually mitigate even the most tenuous of situations, even the most difficult of diplomatic conflagrations. But it's true. You know, we had that moment in the late 80s, early 90s when we thought that maybe Russia was going to change. Maybe there was this era of democracy that's going to come to Eastern Europe. And we saw that for the most part. You know, Eastern Europe has been democratized. Most of those countries wanted dictatorships for centuries. And, you know, we've seen democracy flourish. But Russia is the main exception over here. You know, with, you know, after Boris Yeltsin, you know that presidency, administration was marred with corruption. The oligarchs come to take over the Russian government. Oligarchs, by the way, who are very rich folks connected to corporations who are buying elections, which is something I think that's happening here in America now too. So we got to be careful here. But you're right, though. I mean, they seem to have to be the great nemesis moving forward. Absolutely. And that's the problem that I'm having with somebody like with Donald Trump, you know, who seems to be open and friendly and so willing to, you know, call him his best friend. Is Putin going to be my best friend? You know, he goes to Russia and showboats with these people. He asks Russia to meddle in our own election and invest and find dirt on Hillary Clinton, which is extremely unpatriotic. It's un-American. You know, and there's a lot of good research. All the facts, I think, indicate both the left and the right. People who I respect, but Condoleezza Rice, Madeleine Albright, they're all looking at the Hillary Clinton's, you know, real. I want to say, she didn't meddle in the election, but she really spoke out against Putin and worked against Putin. You know,
as Secretary of State, she's she's responsible party for putting those sanctions in place.
And it's a personal animosity, I believe, that Putin had with Hillary that actually got him involved in this race. And for Donald Trump to know that, to understand that, and to take the side of a foreigner, of a Russian, the Russian president against an American, even though this person is somebody who you're running against in a presidential race, is just completely unpatriotic to me. Yeah, I look at the great example of Mao and Chiang Kai-shek back in the Chinese Revolution. You know, these are two guys, vehement enemies of one another. They fought each other tooth and nail for the destiny of China, for the future of the Chinese people. But the minute the Japanese invaded, they come together in a show of support, stand shoulder to shoulder, and say, "Hey, we're Chinese first. We're gonna take the Japanese out, kick them out, and then we'll go back to our own problems here as the Chinese people." That's the sort of patriotism that we just completely saw. It was remissed from the Donald Trump folks.
So go ahead.
Back on your side of the aisle, let me ask you about a couple of the big issues that you're most passionate about. You touched upon immigration briefly. We're hearing a lot of discussion recently about a couple other big topics, namely the possibility of universal health care and/or single-payer health care. And then secondly, higher education, more access to college, state college, community college, for young people. What are your ideas on those couple of issues?
First and foremost, I'll say that I believe that healthcare is a human right. It's something that can't have a profit factor involved in it. And I'm a huge proponent of single-payer healthcare. I've been a proponent of single-payer healthcare and a universal healthcare system before Dina Titus actually embraced it. Again, I think for political reasons, she started polling and she was like, "Oh, this is something that I need to get behind," you know, as opposed to what I was always about, which is this is a moral thing to do. We need to embrace a universal healthcare system, a single-payer healthcare system in this country. You look at the whole world. You look at the developed world around us, even the less developed parts of the world who embraced a single-payer healthcare system. They spend less of the GDP on healthcare. There's some instances of the people being much healthier, and the cost of healthcare is much lower. So it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. You know, you look at the economists, by and large, across the board, left and right, they all agree on one thing, and that is that if we have a universal healthcare system, a single-payer healthcare system, our GDP spending in healthcare is actually going to go down, all right, from about 18, 19% down to about maybe 12, 13%, which has all sorts of multiplier effects, reciprocal effects on the national debt, on the economic productivity, the growth of the national economy. So it is hands down the right thing to do, and we should vehemently and strongly pursue a single-payer healthcare system moving forward. And I'll champion that if I'm in Congress.
I think the big issue with the universal healthcare is the fact that the premiums keep surmounting so quickly on everybody, and at the same time, the deductibles are increasing. I mean, I think I was looking at a healthcare policy the other day that was. It was $450 a month for myself, and I think my deductible was like $6,500. If you asked me 3-4 years ago a deductible of $6,500, I would have laughed. Because I would have never I would have never thought in a million years that I would have a deductible more than
$500,000,
$2,000 bucks.
Maybe.
Yeah, and that's a problem. You know,
So it almost feels like I think what people are having an issue with is they feel like they're paying for healthcare, but they're not really getting healthcare. They're still having to come out of pocket
Yeah.
so
a lot
much
of
for it.
inefficiencies in the current system.
Number one is you've got the biggest companies in the United States running it. You know, but bottom line is they're the one, and they're limited on their profits. That is true. But Sanders did make the good point that if you're worried about dollars, why are these giant companies involved when the federal government is there? So let me ask you this.
Yeah, but before I move forward, I just want to say one thing about the single-payer healthcare question here, and that is the fact that if you want to mitigate premiums and deductibles, just get rid of them. You have a system in place now where a state apparatus takes control of the healthcare system. You will probably have to pay a tax. I know that Bernie's plan in the U.S. Senate bill is talking about a percentage, 5.2%, 6%. I think those things can all be negotiated here. But the important thing is this now, that most Americans are supportive of this. We know that it's a vast majority of Democrats who support a single-payer healthcare system, and now a plurality of Republicans. So the general will, going back to some of that constitutional language that we've been talking about, seems to support the notion that this is something that the American people want. It's the folks in Congress and the people in government, those who we elect to office, who seem to have the biggest issues with a system in place that is single-payer based. So I think that, again, moving forward, this is just going to grow. It's something that I think that history will show is the right issue to get behind.
The question is, Americans will move in that direction. The question is, after I think a brief discussion that Americans will engage on, and that is, so what happens to excellence in medicine? Because the United States does enjoy the very best health care and the fastest. I think one of the areas that we have to address is the idea that Medicare can't negotiate for pharmaceutical costs is absolutely absurd.
Yeah,
I don't know
absurd.
who's behind that, but whoever it is,
I think we do know. I think we do know who's profiting the most from that bar and the ability to negotiate with the federal government.
So the biggest stack of chips in the room right now, the biggest issue of the day, comes down to gun control and what we're going to do about weapons in the schools. And, a former associate justice wrote to the New York Times an op-ed piece this week saying it's time to get rid of the Second Amendment.
Yeah, Justice Stevens, yes.
The Washington Post came up with what I thought was a brilliant headline, and that is, this may be the stupidest time ever to bring up getting rid of Second Amendment, because now it looks like that's what the kids that are marching all over the country are looking for. That's not what they're looking for.
Yeah.
Where do you come down on Second Amendment? I want to hear the headlines on. You get to rewrite the Second Amendment. You get to put the gun. It's all on you now. Democrats take over and they say, this Reuben guy is pretty bright. Let's hear your.
Yeah, let's get my spiel on it.
Yeah,
well,
this is interesting because you're military and a teacher.
I have a lot to say about it.
And
Especially
victim of a gunshot.
And a victim of an assault rifle. I have an AK-47 round that ran right through my arm, almost ripped my arm off. It's a powerful weapon. And those sort of weapons really just don't belong in the streets. I'll just be real with you. But I'll say this, when it comes down to the whole idea of guns in America. The Second Amendment it's a very oddly written amendment if you look at it. It talks about in order to maintain a well-regulated militia, which is essential to the freedom and securities of a free people, the right of the citizens. You're the lawyer. Shall not be abridged or infringed in any sort of way. So there's like these two parts to it. A discussion on a regulated militia, and then you also have a discourse on the right to bear arms for the citizenry at large. So it's problematic, and I think Justice Stevens understands that, being the brilliant legal scholar that he is. But I think over time, we as a nation, and again, the general will is something that I really go off of. What's the general consensus there amongst the people? I think that the right to own a firearm is something that most Americans agree with. It's now the discourse is over how do you regulate that, and some of the most common sense propositions that have been put out there, background checks on gun purchases.
So you're in favor of background checks?
Of course.
You're in favor of changing the age?
Changing the age, yes, to 21.
Favor of registering at gun shows?
Yes. Oh, the Charleston loophole is a huge problem. You can go into some gun shows here. You have a legal stipulation that says you don't need to have a background check in certain places where the state requires it. even in a local municipality, maybe even. But because it's the sort of a trade show that it is, you don't have to get a background check. It's a huge loophole.
What's been termed high volume magazines.
Oh yeah. I think we should limit magazine capacities. That to me is one of the
what?
crux issues. You know, if you
To how much? What's a reasonable number?
I would say for if you want to go and sports shoot, 6 rounds. Good old 6-shooter. You know,
Okay.
these magazine capacities with 30 clips, 50 rounds, 100-round barrel you can get at some of these gun shows is just, to me, I don't even know why you need to have a 100-round barrel.
So a lot of 9mm pistols that have been around since the turn of the last century are 12-round
Yeah,
magazines.
yeah.
So what's that poor guy supposed to do? Toss it in the fire? What
Yeah.
do we do? We get
I
rid of
think
it?
that's we can have the discussion. You know, what's the magazine capacity? You know, a limit. You know, I own a firearm. I have multiple firearms, and I use them simply for protection and for sports shooting. I'll go out to the range. You know, I'll shoot shoot some cans, shoot some targets. You know, I'm a Marine. You know, it's something that's it's a part of who I am. You know, I have firearms for home for protection, so on and so forth. But the conversations, especially with these mass shootings, really hinge upon the idea of being able to put rounds down on people. This is a military concept. You know, we know that in close combat, you know, it oftentimes comes down to how many rounds you can put down against your enemy or your opponent. So you have these weapons that were developed, the M16, the AK-47, the Uzi with the Israelis, that had the ability now to have longer clips, 30-round clips, 50-round
Stack the
clips,
clip.
to literally just put rounds down on people, to keep them down. And that's sort of an issue we're having here with these AR-15s, AK-47s in these mass shootings. You have a situation that you can move into an area, a classroom, or a school, and you have a whole bunch of people there who are in a very small space, and you can just open up on them. That's where the actual issue is. If you limited, say that we only had 5-round magazines for an AR-15, as opposed to a 30-round magazine, I can guarantee you just that one limitation itself would have saved dozens of lives in any of these mass shootings that we've had.
Chuck, let's talk for a moment, if you would, because a handgun looks very, very powerful until you see it out on the street next to an AR-15.
Oh, yeah.
A handgun is a pop gun.
Oh, yeah.
Any police officer that runs into a school with a 14-round magazine, 9mm, chances are 9mm, up against an AR-15, what would your chances?
Oh yeah, the AR-15 all day. You know, that's there's even the stipulation here with police, most law enforcement, is that you have to the minimal round that you can use is a 9mm round. It has to be larger than that. You know, 45, 40 cal, that sort of a thing. So when you're in a gunfight with somebody with an AR, of course you're going the person with the AR is going to win. And you see these school shootings, that seems to be the weapon of choice. And again, I think the weapon is a powerful weapon, of course, but it's the magazine capacity is what it is. You outgun law enforcement every single time when you have an AR, and this is something they can easily. And again, this may be getting too technical here. This is the Marine in me speaking. You know, there's an old trick that we used to have in the Marine Corps. You take two magazines, you tape the damn thing,
Flip it.
So you know you're in a firefight. You know you're in Fallujah, wherever you're at, back in the Vietnam days, Hue City, Da Nang, and then you empty the clip. All you do is hit the magazine release button, turn it around,
Good to go.
restock it. You have another 30 rounds. That's what you can do with these magazines.
One thing that I don't think that people understand, because there are discussions that step over this all the time, a machine gun isn't particularly effective at shooting individuals. It's a defensive weapon to keep people down. When you want to kill people, you switch over to semi-automatic.
Yeah, it's true.
That's when you shoot a person in the head and kill them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're making a lot of noise.
You know your infantry tactics here.
So tell us, you were a turret gunner? Is that
I was a
correct?
turret gunner, yeah.
In Fallujah.
In
So
Fallujah. I was a truck driver
what time of the
turret
day?
gunner. We did that. We always flipped seats, we used to call it.
What time of the day is it that you're out?
I was out. We drove 24/7 through the hot, Iraqi summer days and also at night. But if you're talking about the incidents that took place in Iraq, that was at nighttime, late at night. I want to say 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Fallujah being one of the most dangerous places on earth.
On Earth at
that
the time.
point.
At the time, yes.
And so
We saw the heaviest fighting in American military histories in Fallujah since the Vietnam War. By
you're
the way.
basically flying the flag, and that means people hate you with everything that they have.
Oh, yeah.
It's your job to shoot what are you shooting? You're shooting a 50 or?
I had a 240 Golf, which is a belt-fed machine gun.
All right. And
I had a M4 with me, which is the military version of the AR.
And so you're up. It's your turn in the hole, and what happens?
Well, we're coming back from a resupply mission from Camp Fallujah, and we had to drive through the city of Fallujah. And just to give you a little bit of background here, we did all that we could to avoid having to run convoys through the city because it was just such a hellhole. It's such a dangerous place to be. And it's scary. I mean, you're going through with trucks and Humvees, and you have buildings all around you. I mean, it's literally just a shooting gallery for folks. And so the insurgents blew up a bridge that destroyed a road called Mobile. It just brought the whole bridge down, and it kind of forced us to go through the city of Fallujah. So when that happened, we knew that that this was going to be some was going to hit the fan, so to speak.
Gotcha.
So this is my first or my second mission through the city of Fallujah. I was actually hit by a sniper while I was up there in the turret gun, and I remember too as we were driving by, my sector of fire was actually going. The truck's moving this way. My sector of fire is this way.
So you're covering like the
So I'm
seven,
covering, like, yeah,
7 or 8.
yeah, 7 or 8, exactly. Good. This guy knows his infantry, So as we're moving forward, I remember just seeing a muzzle flash and bam, just like the whole world just like slowing down, and this immense pain here in my arm, and I knew right then and there that I was being hit. A sniper shot me. But the crazy thing is this: he just didn't shoot at me one time. He leaned out of the window and just started opening up, screaming at me in Arabic. And I remember looking at him. I had my 240 Golf there, but then I made it instant. This is something, again, a lot of folks have been critical on all sides, and some have praised me to be a hero, and some have said, no, you didn't do your job right. And that is that I didn't open up with my 240 Golf. The guy was clearly shooting at me from a residential complex, an apartment, a bunch of apartment buildings. And I knew that by opening up my 240 Golf, a bell-fed machine gun, and the sort of weapons that all the Marines had with us, we had Ma Deuces, the 50 cals, we had a Mark 19 grenade launcher. We would have brought that entire building down.
Walls are not going to stop those weapons.
Yeah, we would have killed him, but we would have killed everybody else there, all the families, everybody that was in that building. So I grabbed my 240. I said, I can't do this. Pulled out my M4 and screamed at him. I said, he screamed at me in Arabic, and I just told him, this is the language that I said, F you mother effer, I'm from North Las Vegas. Right. So just started opening up on him, and we exchanged a couple rounds, and then he regressed back into the window. And after I saw that the threat was eliminated, I fell back into the gunner hole, and the other Marines there in the truck are like, hey, D'Silva, what took place? What happened? And I was like, I've been hit. They're like, you serious? I'm like, yeah, I've been hit. And then it was dark in there, and I remember the guy next to me, Garcia, who's a supply guy, by the way. He doesn't usually get out the wire too much. He pulled the flashlight out, and his eyes just went like this, like, and I'm like, what's wrong? And he said, what is it? And I looked down at my arm, and it was just a manglement of flesh and bones, and it was just a nasty sight. And he couldn't put the tourniquet on me, so I had to put a tourniquet on myself. And in the middle of all this, being the millennial that I am, I said, you know what? Get a photo of this. I gave him my camera.
Nothing like a selfie when you got your
and
arm
I said, take a
blown
picture of this. Yeah,
Those
crazy.
weapons are specifically made. I don't think people understand this. Up until Vietnam and the advent of the M16, the R-15, bullets were made to hit the person and kill the person. They were like deer rifles, basically. Big, single round, boom. And these rounds were a smaller payload meant to bounce around in the body to do the absolute as much destruction and not leave an exit wound. So you'd have to tie up 2 or 3 other people to help the injured out. And tie up their supply lines, tie up their medical.
They're designed to bounce off bones. So you have an entrance wound, say in your rib, and it'll come out your thigh. So you have 2 holes that you have to deal with. I mean, it's designed again to wreak havoc on the human body, but also to cause havoc amongst medical professionals who are trying to respond to these folks and just create a fog of war with the enemy.
In the movies, in the next scene, you're fine. You've got a bandage, and you go. And what happened in real life? How long is it your rehab take?
Oh yeah, about a year. I went to Balboa Navy Hospital. That's where I did my rehab. I spent some time in Landstuhl, Germany. That's like the center point where really all the injured are brought in. And I remember just showing up there, being in a hospital bed, and I was ambulatory. I could walk around. I had a cast, but everybody else there was blown up. I was one of the few guys that was shot, and you got to see the different types of injuries you get from being involved with an IED, concussive, shrapnel wounds all through the body.
Fire.
They're just much nastier sort of injuries that you get from a bomb blast. So I walked around the hospital. I met with people. I talked to other wounded Marines and soldiers, and I just remember just a sense of optimism that was coming out of these people. And they were younger than I was. I was 22 years old, 21, 22. These were kids, 18, 19 years old. And that's when I first understood really just the cost of war. Because in combat, somebody's injured, they're medevac taken out, you don't see them again, you hear from them. But being in a hospital situation for over a year, first in launch school where the folks are actually brought in, but before that, even prior to that, in a field hospital in Balad, Iraq, which, by the way, the insurgents bombed while I was in a bed. It's crazy. I mean, just a crazy experience that I went through. Seeing that and then going through a year-long rehab, it really opened my eyes to the costs of war. These are young people now who are going to be affected for the rest of their lives, whether it's through psychologically, things like PTS or physical, wounds that we all bore. But again, it's really young folks who face the brunt of all that. And it really and again, I went on to study diplomacy at places like Yale and at places like UPenn. And my real onus here was the fact that we have to do all that we can to avoid war. Diplomatic avenues should always be maintained, should always be open, and we have to do all that we can to avoid war. I'm not saying that we have to, it's not going to come, or we shouldn't prepare for it or be ready for it, but we have to do all that we can to avoid it. This is some of my issues right now with the way the rhetoric that's coming out of not just the Trump administration, but around the world. It seems to be just a world that's saber rattling, that wants to fight as opposed to sit down and talk.
You know who doesn't want to saber rattle?
Who's that now?
China.
Oh yeah.
That's how they got where they are. They avoid war at all costs.
I think China is somebody that we have to pay a lot of attention to, because as all this mumbo jumbo and crazy stuff is going on around the world, they're slowly doing the same thing we did back in the at the end of the First World War and Second World War. They're going into the less developed world. They're building relationships with those governments. They're funding projects. They have a Africa-China relationship now that you see China putting in billions, if not trillions of dollars in building institutions, building schools, building hospitals in Africa. So when it comes down to it, who are those countries now going to have more of an allegiance to, more of a respect for? China or the United States? So I think we have to be aware of this. This is happening right underneath our eyes, and it's going to have a tremendous effect on international relations and politics in the 21st century. And we have to pay more attention to what China's doing right now.
To switch gears just a little bit, what was your impression of the big march and demonstrations over the weekend and the this resurgence in enthusiasm from so many school students and others as well on raising awareness on the gun issues? How do you see that playing out?
Yes.
Do you see that gaining strength? Do you think it has the potential to change a lot of minds? Where do you see that movement going?
Yeah, I am damn proud of those young people, getting out there and participating in democracy. At Rancho High School, I had a group of students who came to me and said, "Hey, Mr. D'Silva, we want to organize our own rally here. We don't want to march and get out of leave class because it's just going to end up being just a cluster of sorts. Nothing was organized. So we want to have an organized moment where we all come together as students and we want to express ourselves. We want to call for school safety. We want to call for limiting, gun reform." And they did it. We had a rally on the corner of Searles and Bruce. About 50 students came out, the community came out, students came out. It was covered by all the news stations. And those kids now, these young people who can't even vote, who oftentimes are said to just be full of passion and ideal, but not about actual commitment to reform, are the ones who are leading the movement. And as a teacher, I'll always say that it makes me proud as a civics teacher to see that these kids are actually applying the principles that we teach them in class in actual real life. But I think this one is different. I feel that this is going to be one that's much more prolonged, and it's actually bringing about some legislative change now with the Florida law that is an excellent example of this. And I think that moving forward, this is a movement that is going to catch more steam, and we can now maybe start seeing some national laws put into place. I think first and foremost that the background check legislation is something that we can actually maybe pass. Limiting magazine capacities, banning bump stocks. Even Donald Trump is talking about banning bump stocks. The NRA is discussing the idea of banning bump stocks. So gun reform again, moderate, modest. This isn't anything radical. Is something that is, I think, on the uptick at the moment.
So on another issue, but still keeping with the kids, there's a lot of talk on education, and Nevada hasn't exactly been the premier state for education in the country. And some people are going as far as even, I know there's a lot of supporters that want to just disband the federal Department of Education and leave it down to the states. So where is your position on education, how to improve the education for Nevada?
I think inherently all education is local, at its heart and core. We, the people who can make the best decisions for education matters are the teachers, the principals, the area directors, those sort of folks, and we have to listen to them. So oftentimes you'll have like a national policy that rolls out, No Child Left Behind, or something like this. The Every Child Succeeds Act, by the way, is actually pushing against a lot of that and giving a lot of local entities more control as to what's going on. So I think if you look at it from a federalist, viewpoint, local decisions like education need to really be held in the hands of local actors. So empower teachers, empower principals, empower local school districts. The more national of a scope a law is, if you start seeing more standardized testing, you start seeing more standardized approaches to education, that actually doesn't help. We know that, again, in a country as diverse and as different as the United States, and Massachusetts is going to have a much different educational approach than, say, Mississippi or Hawaii or Nevada. So we have to be cognizant of that. Would I be somebody who says that the U.S. Department of Education should be disbanded? Hell no. I think they do a lot of good. They help us look at education from a national lens and understand it better. But on the same token, I don't think that national policies that regulate the intricacies of education should be coming from the U.S. Department of Education. Maybe a very, very, very broad, rulings or laws that hopefully empower locals, like the Every Child Succeeds Act, is what we need from the Department of Education. And also funding, that's the other big aspect here. The U.S. Department of Education is responsible for things like the Perkins Grant, the Stafford loans, the Pell Grant, the Perkins loans, so on and so forth, and also funding for local projects. I think that's a very important role for the U.S. Department of Education, and it's one that we need at the moment.
So, because you're a veteran, because you're a former Marine, here's the ultimate underhand pitch. Let's wrap this up. Why should the people of CD1 vote for Reuben D'Silva?
I'll tell you one thing. Again, this is no denigration to Dina. I think she served astutely. She served well, but she's been in politics this is her fourth decade. Barack Obama famously said that if we're gonna be a successful party moving forward, a successful Democratic Party, we need to elect people into office who are rooted in the realities of the people they represent, who can serve as true voices for them. Again, Dina is somebody who's been a part of this system now that has not done well, that has failed in many regards for so many years. And it's incumbent upon Democrats to look at different options. Dina is a millionaire. I'm a working class guy. I'm a school teacher who makes $47,000 a year. I'm somebody who committed myself to that career. I could have gone anywhere I wanted after graduating from Yale and Penn with all the degrees that I had, and I had great job offers lined up. But I said, let me go back to my neighborhood, Rancho High School, Civic Center in Lake Mead, and teach those kids, educate those kids, and tell them, hey, look, if I could do it, you could do it too. I've been doing this for the last 5 years now. Before that, I was in the Marine Corps. You want to talk about veterans issues. Dina's done some things for veterans, but I can tell you right now, it'll pale in comparison to what I will do for the veterans community. I will be the only Democrat with a Purple Heart. Think about that. What kind of resonance will I have with lawmakers and other people when I sit down and say, hey, look, I took a bullet for this country. This is why we need X, Y, Z for veterans, as opposed to Dina, who can sit there and say, well, I support veterans. I'm going to be for them, but it's not going to have the teeth or can't be a weapon for the veterans community as I can be. And there's a lot of people in D.C. too, and this is something you may be aware of, who are actually looking forward to having me in Congress, who know that I will do a much better job than Dina Titus across the board. You want to talk about immigration reform. Dina's done some great things and stood up for the immigration community, but I am an immigrant. I'm somebody who was in this country for 10 years without papers. I know what it means to be a dreamer because I was a dreamer. I know what it feels like to have the La Migra, as we used to call them back in the day, coming into your neighborhood and feel hesitant. I know what it's like to have, and we talked about this too, get a letter from the INS saying that your mom's going to be deported. We went to every Democrat back then, And very few even responded back to us. One of the few exceptions was Bill Bray, who you work for.
Jim Bilbray.
And the one guy who really helped my pop's side and my mom, this is in the early 90s now, was Richard Bryan. And it's because of him that my mom got a stay of deportation. So I know what those what those issues are because I live them. You want to talk about education? I'm at the front lines of the great paramount educational crisis that we're faced with as a nation. I teach in an overcrowded classroom. I teach students now who are coming from a socioeconomic backgrounds that are poor kids. I'll just be real with you, who don't eat at home, who only eat at school. I teach using textbooks that don't have covers, and this is again what I do, what I live, and who I am. And this is why I know for a fact I would be much more of a empathetic congressperson than Dina Titus, and I would be a weapon for the Democratic Party if I go to and a major asset, much more of an asset than Dina Titus could ever be if I'm elected to Congress.
And with that, we will call it a day.
So thank you so much.
Thank you. The Las Vegas Legal Podcast. I want to thank you, Reuben D'Silva, a candidate for Congressional District 1. D'Silva's up against Dina Titus. Representative Titus, will have you on the show whenever we're ready to come. Tyler Morgan, publisher of Vegas Legal Magazine, thanks for doing the good work, bringing some new life to the legal community in Southern Nevada. Jeff Haney, Vice President of Fiero Communications, the friendliest marketing firm in Las Vegas. For all of you out there with a story to tell, a story idea, an axe to grind, get a hold of Vegas Legal, the leading magazine in Southern Nevada legal market. Call Tyler at
702-222-3476.
Reach out, tell us, tell your friends. Have a good one.